Well, thank you all for coming and joining us online this morning. My name is Jamie Court. I am president of ConsumerWatchdog, and with me is Carmen Balber, the executive director of ConsumerWatchdog. And we're here this morning to talk about the findings of our report, Brown's Dirty Hands. Let me say just this before we begin. This was a 4-month review of Governor Brown's campaign contributions to his causes, and contributions to the Democratic Party, and a correlation of those contributions with actions by his administration that were to the benefit of 26 companies, 26 energy companies that we charted. So we looked at 26 oil, gas, and utility companies that got favorable treatment from this administration right through the regulatory process or the legislative process. And then we took a look at the actions that the administration helped with, and we took a look at the timing of contributions. And it was a very troubling correlation. The report was written by Lisa Tucker, who is on assignment in Italy right now, a family assignment, so she's not here. But the report really paints a troubling picture. You know, we want to acknowledge first off that Governor Brown has walked the world and talked out against climate change, and I think in that way he has done an important thing for California and for climate change. However, this review of his administration's actions on behalf of big oil, gas, and utility companies and the contributions that they delivered, often very close to the actions the administration took, is a very troubling picture. Governor Brown has clearly gotten his hands dirty, helping the biggest oil, gas, and utility companies in the state, and they have reciprocated with very large contributions to his causes. And what's really troubling is that many of these contributions didn't come to his charities or to his campaign committees, but they came to the Democratic Party. And that's something that we really need to talk about today. And that's why much of this money has been hidden in the past. Governor Brown took in about $10 million from these 26 big oil, gas, and utility companies since he started his run for governor in 2010, his first run for governor. He took in $9.8 million since he opened his committee. And we've often found the correlation between these contributions and actions that help the companies who contributed. The major investor-owned utilities, for example, gave $6 million, which is a very large total, a lot of it to the Democratic Party. And what's really disconcerting in this report, in fact, is the use of the Democratic Party as a laundry machine for the governor's big oil, gas, and utility contributions. To demonstrate this, let me just show you a little snapshot. Between 2011 and 2014, big energy companies, Chevron, the 3 big investor-owned utilities, Occidental Petroleum, Calpine, ConocoPhillips, these are the big companies that we caught giving big contributions to the Democratic Party. They have contributed $4.4 million in the first 4 years of the governor's time in office, and that money went to the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party turned around and gave, of the 4.4, they gave another 4.7 million right back to the governor's campaign committee in 2014. So there's almost a direct pass-through between the money contributed by these large oil, energy, and gas companies to the Democratic Party, and then the money that came out of the Democratic Party to the governor. And let me say this, it is illegal to earmark money in the Democratic Party. No candidate, no official can take a contribution to the party knowing that that contribution is going to come out the other end and go to them. But when you look at the money into the Democratic Party from these big companies and the money out, particularly as they're timed with the favors, it's really hard to come to any other conclusion. So we are passing this report, Brown's Dirty Hands, on to the Fair Political Practices Committee because we believe it's worthy of investigation on this front. I would say this as well, before we get into some of the specific contributions and actions in a moment. The governor's policies beyond his advocacy against climate change on a worldwide stage, have really come at some significant harm to the environment and the consumer. On the oil industry side, the governor has refused to accept a ban on fracking and has signed only very weakened fracking disclosure rules. The governor has allowed oil and drilling as well with well safety standards that are way substandard. The governor has refused to ban fracking in the state. He's refused to put curbs on oil drilling. And the governor has also, on the oil front, really come to support this cap and trade concept and gone head to head with the oil industry, yes. But that is actually a concept the oil industry is pretty comfortable with. He hasn't supported the carbon tax. And at key times, as you'll see in the legislative process, he walked away from some reforms that could have been very tough on the oil industry, and campaign contributions were coming in close proximity. And maybe most troubling to the state, he's also walked away from an oil severance tax in the state, which is a big money booster for the state budget. On the utility side, the governor has been a very big advocate of natural gas-fired power plants, which are fossil fuel powered power plants, even though we are very over capacity in our electricity capacity. We don't need no more plants. He's done very favorably with the utilities, as you'll hear at the PUC, at Public Utilities Commission. He's taken numerous actions to really benefit these utilities, just as a big picture matter. And the specifics of the timing maybe are what's most troubling, because when you see contributions made in close proximity to the action taken on behalf of an industry, it really raises eyebrows, and that's what we have here. I'm going to go to this timeline, which if you're on the report, you will see page 7 is what we're working from. It's a highlights timeline of these contributions. You'll see from the beginning of the governor's administration, he appointed, by the way, let me back up 1 second. He appointed the beginning of his administration as his top secretary, Nancy McFadden, executive secretary. She is a former senior VP at Pacific Gas and Electric. And she, as well as former top aide Dana Williamson, hailed from Pacific Gas and Electric. McFadden is the subject now of a fair political practice investigation that one of our complaints initiated that's been open for 4 months now, in February, maybe longer than 4 months. But I should say that when we're looking at the trail to the Democratic Party and the money being funneled to the Democratic Party and earmarked apparently for Brown, Nancy McFadden and Dana Williamson, both paid by the Democratic Party about $100,000 during the governor's administration. So his top aides moonlighted for the Democratic Party at the same time as we're seeing big contributions coming into the Democratic Party and then going back out to his campaigns and his causes. And the timing of some of these is really, I think, troubling. And so that's what we're going to go into now. But you can see that as a good example, on this timeline, when we're starting with the appointment of McFadden, there was a big debate that emails uncovered that showed very quickly there was a fight for the struggle of the Public Utility Commission and who would be appointed. And emails basically fingered Ms. McFadden as a conduit to try to help Michael Peavy, the head of the Public Utility Commission, get a pro-utility majority on that commission. And Mark Farron was chosen as a commissioner to tilt the balance towards the utilities, and that in fact did happen. That complaint, by the way, that we filed against McFadden was outside the statute of limitations. There are some other complaints that are pending with the Fair Political Practice Committee. But nonetheless, emails that came out in the corruption scandal really pointed to McFadden as a conduit. And when we know that when, for instance, Mr. Farron was appointed to the PUC, we saw PG&E come up with a pretty big contribution to the Democratic Party on the day of that appointment, which was preceded by larger contributions after McFadden was appointed secretary. And going into the administration, you also saw some other oil and gas things. This is early 2011. You saw 2 Occidental incidents that are really troubling. We had oil well regulators at the Department of Conservation at Dogger who were fired. This has been a documented incident by Governor Brown's staff about 8 months into the administration because they were coming down hard on well safety. Shortly after that, Occidental made very large contributions and these have been documented, to Governor Brown's ballot measures committees and causes. We're talking about on the order of $500,000. And that was early in the administration. And Prop 30, which was something that was hanging in the air to set the balance for this administration, also became a real subject of debate. So I'm going to turn it over to Carmen as we start the administration to start to look at some of these transactions. Occidental contributions to Prop 30, I think, are a big one. But also, before I turn it over, there was a big settlement with NRG, which happened to be an electric price manipulation settlement that came down. And NRG was a company, bought a company called Dynergy. You may remember it because it ripped us off during electricity prices. NRG was never a donor to anyone. But at the same time, you'll see that they became a big donor to Brown and his projects, given over $105,000 after that. And so these are what makes up the total to the party. So going from there, I think some of the utility and oil company contributions Carmen's going to bring in are things that you'll all remember when the actions happen, but you might not have seen the contributions on the back end.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm Carmen Bulber. I'm the Executive Director of ConsumerWatchdog. And I think that's really important here to note that some of these scandals have been discussed before. In fact, there is legal action against PG&E and PV on the basis of one of the scandals we're going to talk about now. But no one has ever dug into and discovered the trail of campaign contributions from the energy industry to Governor Brown and his issues, primarily because many of those donations went to the party as a pass-through, or at least apparently they did. So bring you back to early 2013, the scandal that everyone knows about is that Southern California Edison and the president of the Public Utilities Commission met secretly in Warsaw, Poland, and cut a deal about the closure of San Onofre that put 70% of the $4+ billion cost of the closure of that plant on ratepayers instead of the utility. On the same exact day they made that secret deal in Warsaw, Poland, Southern California Edison gave $130,000 to the California Democratic Party. Contribution, perhaps coincidence, in the context of all of these other contributions to the party and Brown's causes, it makes you question whether or not there was a quid pro quo there. When looking at the oil companies, there's a very troubling example by Chevron that I think I'll pull out first and then tell you what it was that the oil companies wanted from the Brown administration. At the end of 2013, Chevron gave the California Democratic Party $350,000. On that same exact day, sorry, just let me get that right. 7 days later, 1 week later, so let me just repeat that. At the end of 2013, Chevron gave the California Democratic Party $350,000. 7 days later, the party gave Governor Brown's reelection committee $300,000. On the same day as that, Chevron gave the governor's committee an extra $54,000. We have almost exactly the same amount of money that Chevron gave to the party, and then the party turned around and gave to Governor Brown. Paints a troubling picture of the Democratic Party being used as a pass-through for these oil industry contributions. Which makes you ask, what did the oil industry get from Governor Brown? Jamie touched on it. One of the biggest deals that year was fracking. There was a big push building to either ban fracking or at least put a moratorium on it until we could prove it was safe in California. In May of 2013, legislators exempted a crucial type of well injection from the fracking regulation legislation. This was a move that really gutted a lot of what this bill, SB4, would have done. On the same day that exemption was made, Chevron gave another $135,000 to the Democratic Party. Now we know from sources inside the Capitol that the governor's executive secretary, Nancy McFadden, was very involved in the discussions around the amendments to that bill. Following these amendments to the fracking legislation, Occidental also gave contributions to the governor. $27,200 in July, and another $100,000 to his pet charity, the Oakland Military Institute, right after SB 4 was signed by the governor. So we see a picture of oil companies giving contributions to Brown directly correlated to actions taken by the legislature and influenced by Brown on fracking legislation that essentially left us with legislation that did not regulate fracking in California. And then finally, SB 350. This is the most recent legislation. Last year was a fight to improve California's environmental protections, and SB 350 had 3 prongs. 2 of those prongs, initially, were to the utilities benefits. To the utilities benefit. But the third piece that no one really talks about was a last-minute amendment to the bill. So SB 350 in September of 2015 had a last-minute amendment pushed by the governor's office to create a regional electricity grid. The Western grid, which has been the hope of the utility industry going back to deregulation. It was debunked at the time. It came back in a last-minute deal in SB 350 at the end of the year. Just 2 weeks after that change, that last-minute backroom amendment, PG&E gave $80,000 to the Democratic Party. So we see, oh yeah, don't let me forget the other action that Governor Brown took at the end of the legislative session last year, which was a series of PUC reform bills that the legislature proposed that passed the legislature nearly unanimously, a package of 6 bills, because the picture of corruption overwhelmingly clear, so troubling that the entire legislature, bipartisan agreement that this needed to be reformed. So the legislature sent Brown 6 bills on PUC reform. The governor vetoed those bills. 7 days later, PG&E gave the California Democratic Party another $50,000, and at the end of the year, added on top of that another $175,000. So we see amazing amounts of money that PG&E gave to the California Democratic Party around actions that the governor took that benefited the utilities. So I'll turn it back over to Jamie.
There's a couple of specific things if you're asking where is Governor Brown or is this just his aides? And we know that the governor doesn't use public email. And Nancy McFadden doesn't use public email. And we gather from the Public Records Act request that these are all sort of private email accounts that don't keep a public record. But we do know from emails that have been made public some of the governor's involvement, both in helping Edison, which, protecting it after some information came out of light that the San Onofre deal was a debacle, that Barbara Boxer made public, in helping, allegedly, in an email that said the CEO of Edison had talked to Brown, and Brown was going to back up the deal. But we also know something very specific about the governor's involvement with the Public Utility Commission. This is supposed to be an independent commission. But if you look at emails from PG&E's top lobbyist, Bob Cherry, he said very specifically that the governor intervened with Mark Farron, his appointment to the Public Utility Commission, to get approval for a power plant called Oakley. And this was something that PG&E really wanted. And according to an email from Brian Cherry, he said Jerry's direct plea was decisive. That day, PG&E donated $20,000 to the California Democratic Party after the PUC voted for the project. And we see, as you read through this report, incident after incident where actions were taken and contributions followed. But to see an email showing the governor very personally involved in the approval of a power plant and then PG&E making a contribution, it really shows the level of coordination in the governor's office with the Public Utility Commission. And a lot of other emails uncovered through the PUCpapers.org that we've already documented, but again, put many of them in this report, show that top-level officials like Nancy McFadden are involved both in helping the utilities on a daily basis, and at the same time, they're working for the Democratic Party, which creates a direct connection between the two. I'm going to switch now to the chart. On the report, it is the Dirty Hands chart, which is on page 15, that shows exactly the insiders from the energy industry and the utility industry that were placed in key places by the governor to help the utilities and the oil and gas companies. And I should say one thing that I think is really important here about the family connections which go into the report. Governor Brown, I know he talks about against big oil, and he talks about climate change being a problem. I believe he believes that, but his family made its bones with and its fortunes with Indonesian oil money, and he is also very highly connected to PG&E and through family connections and to the utility industry. And these are great sources of loyalty, which help to explain these administrative actions on behalf of the companies and the connections. But I will say his sister, Kathleen Brown, has benefited maybe more than anyone else from her governor's position on the utility industry. Kathleen Brown sits on the board of Sempra, which is the parent company of Southern California Gas that suffered the largest methane leak in U.S. history. Our report shows that Kathleen Brown, the governor's sister, made, after her appointment in 2013 to the Sempra board during the governor's administration, $679,000 from being on that Sempra board. And the governor, since the Aliso Canyon explosion, has taken extraordinary steps to use his official position and that of his administration to keep Aliso open and to keep the investigation around Aliso quiet. And contributions from Sempra have followed. More importantly, I think that when consumer groups like ours and Geary and Severson down in San Diego petitioned for an open investigation, an order instituting an open investigation as there was in San Onofre and San Bruno, the governor and the Public Utility Commission ignored it. All the evidence about what went wrong in Aliso is under wraps. Kathleen Brown was on the Health and Safety, chair of the Health and Safety Committee of the board. And she was making $679,000 for a few years' work on that board while the governor and his administration were helping to keep Sempra's prime asset in Aliso open. Recently, the administration collaborated in private through the California Energy Commission, the ISO, and many of the agencies and the people on this board or in this chart on page 15 in order to have a finding that without Aliso, the lights would go out in California. And many critics and many engineers have said that's just not true. We don't need Aliso for our natural gas powered electric plants. We just don't. We don't. It's all about because we have pipes that come from other states. We can get around it. We don't want to do without it. And the governor's administration has backed Sempra up. And by the way, since SB 350 passed last year, which was a Christmas tree for the utilities, the stock of all three utilities have gone up by more than 14% within 2 months. And they continue to go. During the Brown administration, Sempra stock has gone up by over 100%. So this is a real troubling side effect. Also, Kathleen Brown is on the board of a real estate company called Forrester that has real estate that's developing right near Porter Ranch. And obviously, if there was an open investigation in Porter Ranch and the problems with that facility and the area, it might damage that investment. So I think in addition to the sort of connections you see here and on this chart, we can't forget Kathleen Brown as an influence in terms of the governor really having a greater duty than he's lived up to and having more transparency, openness in the Aliso Canyon investigation and all his utilities dealings. He has, by the way, as our report showed, really backed up Michael Peavy, who is the center of the corruption scandal. He's under criminal investigation. He has said about Peavy after we learned about the secret deals Peavy cut as the president of the PUC in Warsaw and elsewhere. The governor said he's a very effective leader. And many of Peavy's cohorts have come to take hold. I'll just don't want to belabor this, but I do want to go into one specific example. Leanne Randolph. This is a classic example of how the Brown administration has let former utility oil and gas people into the administration, and they've done terrible damage. Leanne Randolph came into the administration after a career as a lawyer representing Chevron and the Western States Petroleum Association. She now is a public utility commissioner. She's replaced Mark Farron, who used to be an energy trader at Credit Suisse during the electricity crisis. He was the swing
Deutsche Bank.
He was Deutsche Bank.
Not Credit Suisse. Deutsche Bank.
Deutsche Bank. And he basically has been a big proponent of freer policies for the utilities. But Leanne Randolph, who replaced him, was appointed by Jerry Brown in 2014. Before that, after leaving her gig as a lobbyist and lawyer for Chevron and WISPA, according to the Secretary of State's office, basically went to the Department of Natural Resources as the general counsel, where she was involved in the firing of Derek Chernow and Elena Miller, who were the heads of the Department of Conservation in Dogger, who were demanding greater well safety. And they got fired for demanding greater well safety and that we live up to EPA standards. And by the way, the well safety standards they were implementing would have probably saved that blowout in Aliso Canyon by making sure that every well was permitted and every well was up to date. So Leanne Randolph was involved in the firing of Derek Chernow and Elena Stern at the request of former Governor Gray Davis, who at that time, after he left office, was working for Occidental, who, as we discussed, ultimately gave $500,000 to Governor Brown's Prop 30 and his causes after that firing. So Leanne Randolph is a classic example of the revolving door between the oil, gas, utility industry and the Brown administration that's caused a lot of these policies to take place. We know from the communications as well that Michael Picker, who replaced Michael Peavy, his longtime Brown aide, as the president of the commission, he did not want to reopen the San Onofre investigation. He's gone to Wall Street to appease the investors at the expense of the ratepayers, and the money continues to flood in from the utility companies to the Brown administration. So if you look between McFadden, Michael Peavy, Robert Weisenmiller, who again was a consultant on the outside, had done deals and worked for Michael Peavy, is now the head of the California Energy Commission, is now advocating for a Western grid in the regional Western grid of the United States. These are all inside hands. Governor Brown has put in key pivotal places old oil, gas, and utility hands who have executed the policies of these companies. That is a reversal, I will say, from the first days of his administration, when he appointed Mike Florio and Sandoval to the Public Utility Commission, and the utilities got very concerned about the balance of power, then switching to the consumer. And before the first year of his administration, he had accomplished in the first months through Nancy McFadden giving the utilities a solid hold on the Public Utility Commission. He had gotten rid, within 8 months, of the tough regulators who he had appointed and stood behind at Dogger and the Department of Conservation. And after that, we saw a huge amount of contributions coming in, both to his causes, his committees, and the party from these companies. And it is though Prop 30 in particular, which was a moment when the governor's fiscal austerity and whether he'd be able to manage a budget, whether he'd have national reputation was tested, the companies that contributed, like Occidental, to that cause, those companies helped make the governor's legacy. And they also got a lock on government. And that's not the way government should work. So our real concern, and we'll take some questions because there's an awful lot in this report and we could go on and on and on and on, is that during the governor's 6 years, even though he's had a high profile against climate change, the oil, gas, and utility companies have gotten away with an awful lot, and they've also given an awful lot. And we really believe there needs to be a Fair Political Practices Commission investigation into the use of the Democratic Party as the slush fund, because there's too much evidence that people within the administration, particularly the fixers like Nancy McFadden, used official actions as leverage for contributions to the party. She worked for the party at the same time. Dana Williamson worked for the party at the same time as well. She was working for the governor. The actions are very closely timed. The contributions in the case of Chevron are closely timed. Earmarking is illegal, and it shouldn't happen, and the governor of California shouldn't participate in it. We need to make sure that this administration is cleaned up, and we hope the Fair Political Practices Commission will look at this. We also, believe that going forward, there needs to be a lot more transparency in investigations into the utility companies in particular, and into the oil and gas industry. So I think we'll take any questions. I'm just trying to see if I find, at the end of the report, I would say there's a list of all the contributions and all the actions and the timing of them from 2009 on, when he opened his committee for office. And I think what we would say is that there's a couple of years left in this administration, and I think Governor Brown needs to do a little house cleaning in his office, and maybe a little inventory check on what his priorities are, because this is still a state that needs a fracking ban. This is still a state that needs greater limits on oil drilling. And it's not going to happen if this type of cash register politics continues. And it's the end of time, it's legacy time, and this is a time to acknowledge what's happened and move on and try to change things for the future for the better. So any questions?